Hello, welcome to our Facebook Live today. So glad to see all of you in our audience. Everyone here is letting us know what the weather is like where they are in the world. I see Lori says it's gray and cloudy in Windsor, Ontario. And Steve says it's a beautiful day in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Let's see, we have Barbara who says there's going to be some rain tonight. So no matter what the weather is, wherever you are joining us from, we are just so glad to have you here in our audience. And we have a really, really interesting discussion today. And I think that all of you will find it informative and a lot of ideas to ponder and to revisit maybe. So a great session lined up for you all today with Judy Russell, the legal genealogist. Before we get into our speaker and some more details about today's session, I just want to let you know about what we have going on here at MyHeritage. So if you've been reading our blog, blog.myheritage.com, where we normally update on new features and MyHeritage news, things that are going on at MyHeritage, we recently released a feature called the MyHeritage Photo Repair. And the Photo Repair is just an incredible tool, another photo tool that we've added to our photo toolbox. And what the MyHeritage Photo Repair does is that it fixes creases, holes, tears that you may have in your old family photos, whether they were stored in a shoebox in an attic or maybe in a photo album. Sometimes they do not weather well, and they may have some damage on them, these old photos, old family photos, old historical photos. So by scanning them through the MyHeritage mobile app or just scanning them and uploading them to your MyHeritage family site on your computer, you can then use the MyHeritage Photo Repair feature, and it's like magic. You'll see that within seconds, your photo looks just as good as new. So we suggest that you try it out if you haven't yet, and we'll put a link to the blog post explaining more about that feature in the comments section. So for today's session, we're gonna actually have a draw, and we're gonna give away a MyHeritage Complete Plan to one lucky winner today. So the winner we'll have to leave a question or a comment in the comment section, and you could tell us maybe, since we just talked about MyHeritage photo tools, let us know about something that you've learned using the MyHeritage photo tools. We've heard stories of users who colorized a photo and enhanced it, and they were able to recognize someone in the photo that they hadn't seen before. Lots of amazing, incredible stories like that. So tell us what the MyHeritage photo tools have taught you, what you've learned by using them, or how you enjoy using them. We'd love to hear that. And if you haven't tried the MyHeritage photo tools yet, please do, but you can still enter the draw by just leaving a comment or a question today. So the prize is going to be a MyHeritage Complete Plan. That's the best plan we have to offer here at MyHeritage. It includes unlimited access to 13 billion historical records. It also includes access to all of our photo features, as well as unlimited family tree size, advanced DNA features, and much more. So one lucky winner will go home with that complete plan today. So we're looking forward to giving that away. So I'd like to now introduce our speaker for today. We have with us the legal genealogist, Judy G. Russell. She's a genealogist with a law degree. She provides expert guidance through the murky territory where law and family history intersect. An internationally known lecturer and award-winning writer, she holds credentials as a certified genealogist and certified genealogical lecturer from the Board for Certification of Genealogists. And her blog, of course, is www.legalgenealogist.com, and we'll put a link to her blog as well in the comments section. So I'm going to bring Judy on to say hello to us. Let's just bring her onto the screen here. Hello, Judy.
And hello there, Esther, and everybody else from all over the world.
It's really incredible to see people joining from all the corners of the world.
I'm really impressed. All the down under folks who probably are 12 hours away from where we are. Amazing.
Incredible. Yeah, I just love seeing how these online sessions just bring us all a little bit closer together.
Absolutely. It's amazing. And it's funny because just today, one of my friends from Queensland or Brisbane, Australia, posted a memory of when we were all at the New Zealand Genealogical Society 50th anniversary. It was 4 years ago. 4 years.
Wow.
Oh, I'm so anxious to get back down there.
Hopefully soon.
I hope. It's not so much a matter of whether the United States will let me out. It's a matter of whether or not the folks down under will let me in.
And until we can all travel, we'll just make do with Facebook Lives.
Absolutely. Getting to talk about some pretty interesting topics.
Yes, we're so excited about this one. I know it's a topic, a lot of questions that are out there and discussed in groups and on the internet. And we see a lot of questions at MyHeritage about these issues. So we're really excited to dive into them.
Terrific. So whenever you're ready, we can go ahead and get started.
Sure. So let me bring your slides up.
If you would, please. And there we go. How about that?
Perfect. So we can see it. We can see it up now.
Amazing stuff. When technology works, it's really cool stuff. So, when we talk about the ethics of doing family history research, let's face it, what we're all really talking about is doing genealogy right, isn't it? I mean, and we all know, I think, that doing genealogy or family history the right way isn't something we're born knowing. Well, maybe you were, but it's a sure bet that I wasn't. I look back on my days as a baby genealogist, and I swear I could have written the book on how to make every mistake in the book. And at least I didn't have my certified genealogical credential then, so I guess I can cut myself a little bit of slack. But, with my father's family being from Germany, and totally from Germany, my father was born there, and my mother's family being from the American South, it took me a lot of effort to come around to realize that there was this thing called the genealogical proof standard that was going to help me understand how to do paper trail research in a way that maybe what I came up with would stand the test of time. And its elements, of course, begin with that reasonably exhaustive research, what we all think of as unreasonably exhausting research. And it goes through accurate and complete source citations, the analysis and correlation of the data that we find, resolution of all those conflicts in order to reach our sound written conclusion that we can then share with other people. Now, I keep at hand a guide to the GPS and to genealogy's best practices in this volume called Genealogy Standards from the Board for Certification of Genealogists. And truth in speaking, I am a trustee of the Board for Certification of Genealogists, but this book isn't just for people who want to put initials after their names. This was really a compendium, a compilation of decades, centuries of the best practices of our field so that we all do things the right way. And it's got standards for documenting, including the scope and specificity and purposes of citations. It's got standards for researching that are going to walk us through the planning stage. Everything from putting together an effective research question to terminating the plan, collecting data, and reasoning from evidence, including DNA evidence. And it's got standards for writing it up, how we express our conclusions, the need to put our information together in clear historical context. great stuff to know. And when we learn all of this and we really start researching and documenting our work the way we know we should, every last one of us, without fail, either already has or is going to run smack dab into the ethical dilemmas that are tucked away in the corners, the closets with the skeletons of every family's history. And every genealogist faces this sooner or later. Things like discovering an illegitimacy or a secret undocumented adoption. There could be a case of bigamy, like my second great-grandfather, or criminal activity, like my second great-grandfather, or mental illness, even suicide. And of course, there's a very dark side of family history that takes us over into incest and more. So these are the tough questions that we come across doing our genealogical research. Where do we find guidance in dealing with questions like that? The answer is right there in that little volume of Genealogy's Best Practices, because that standards volume includes something that guides us in doing genealogy right from an ethical perspective. It's called the Genealogist's Code of Ethics. It's 5 pages of ethical guidance with provisions designed to protect the public, provisions designed to protect those for whom we do research, whether we do it for money or we do it for free. Provisions to protect the field of genealogy itself, and most recently added new provisions to protect those who provide DNA samples for genealogical research. And so there's 6 provisions here and 10 there and 5 there and 2 there, and they've got sub-elements, and you chart it all out and it may look like it's absolutely overwhelming. How do we apply all of these different rules? How are we going to figure out how to do genealogy right from an ethical side? And the fact is that we can break down all of genealogical ethics, the whole business of being family historians the right way, into some pretty basic component rules. And we can talk about them in terms that are a lot easier, I think, for all of us to understand and apply, because these are rules we learned at our mother's knees, at the very latest in kindergarten. 3 basic rules: tell the truth, play nice with others, and don't tell tales out of school. So let's see what I mean by this in a genealogical perspective. So we'll do these one by one, starting, of course, with telling the truth. Now, this impacts us in a number of ways. It certainly impacts us with all of those lovely family stories. You know the ones I mean. There were 3 brothers who came from Europe to America, and one went north, and one went south, and one went west and was never heard from again, right? Or the Cherokee princess that every southern U.S. family seems to descend from, right? And I'm sure that if you're in Australia, it's all of those convict ancestors. And if you're in Europe, it's the royalty. These are the stories that we want to believe. And when we're researching them, we've got ethical obligations. So here's one that's in my family. It's 1 paragraph from a family history that was written by a distant cousin of mine in Texas a half century ago now, 1970, but it was really a half century. And according to this history, our Baker family begins in America with an Alexander Baker who came to Boston in 1635 on the ship the Elizabeth and Anne. And he had a son named Samuel who married Eleanor Winslow. And yeah, like everybody from New England is sitting there going, oh yeah, Winslow's, That's the Mayflower folks. And Samuel and Eleanor, according to this history, had a son named William, who would be my 6th great-grandfather. And William was a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses, the local legislature. That's like gonna get us into colonial dames. William's son married Dorothy Davenport, so those are my 5th great-grandparents, and their home was visited, you know it, by General George Washington on one of his trips in Virginia, which means that we've got famous relatives. We've got lots of famous relatives. Except, of course, there are a few minor little problems with this story, like the fact that DNA establishes definitively that we don't descend from Alexander Baker of Boston. If there's a common ancestor, it's way back further than that. And it's okay, really, because the Samuel Baker who married Eleanor Winslow, that's not Alexander's son. Anyway, there never was a Mayflower connection for our Bakers. William Baker, yeah, he existed, but he wasn't in the House of Burgesses. There never was a William Baker in the House of Burgesses. There never was a Baker in the House of Burgesses. And of course, absolutely not a shred of evidence that George Washington ever heard of my 5th great-grandparents, much less stayed at their home. So yeah, William is my 6th great-grandfather. Thomas and Dorothy are my 5th great-grandparents, but we don't have famous relatives. We're ordinary folks. And my ethical obligation is to tell the truth about that, not to simply accept the family story because I'd like to believe it's true. It's the same thing with the stuff we don't want to believe. When the 1860 slave census of Atala County, Mississippi records my 2nd great-grandfather claiming ownership of 2 human beings, including a little girl who was just 3 years old, what do I do with this? I tell the truth. That's my ethical obligation. All of us, to take the facts as they are and follow them to the stories the facts support, even if it's not the one we wanted to tell. So we emphasize what we know, what we can prove, not fictions, not even theory. That doesn't mean we don't theorize. We do, of course. But as ethical genealogists, we want to make sure that we don't mislead others into thinking that our theories are fact. So when we're not sure about things, there are steps we can take. Now, it took me roughly forever to prove that Anne Jacobs Battles, the 2nd wife of William Battles of Cherokee County, Alabama, was my 2nd great-grandmother. I'm sorry, she's my 4th great-grandmother. And I've got only the roughest idea about who her parents are, just a theory. But I don't want anybody to be misled. So what I do in my family tree is I list people I'm not sure of with the middle name of theory. This is just my idea. If you want to buy into it, you're on your own until we prove it. So we don't just grab a bunch of folks from somebody else's tree without checking. And we don't put anybody into our tree without checking. That's not being faithful to our ethical obligation. It's also why I've got a billion unaccepted matches, and I'll work through those one of these years. So making sure people aren't misled is why I'm a great fan of those photo tools out there, like the colorization tool from MyHeritage. Now, there are some people who say it's not being true to the original, and it does take an original document, the photo of my father's Aunt Martha on the left, and it turns it into a derivative, the colorized version on the right. We don't want people to think the original was in color. And there's a watermark on every one of these images that tells us it's been changed. I love that. And I also love the colorization tool personally. So in every respect, whether we're dealing with things we want to believe or don't want to believe or not sure of, or we're using a tool that changes things. We tell the truth. And then we need to go on to rule number 2, playing nice with others. And this comes up mostly because genealogy is a collaborative enterprise. We do it best when we work with others and we exchange information and photos and more. But we've got to be really, really aware of the fact that as researchers, we're very, very often using the work of other people. And those other people may have legal rights in the words they write, the photos they take, the videos, the audio files they create. So when we borrow the work of other people, we need to be really careful not to overuse that copy-paste tool that the computerized world has made so easy for us. Because when we borrow what other people have done without giving them credit for their work, at the very best, we've crossed the line from research into plagiarism. We're taking credit for work we didn't do. And in historical research, including family history research, there's no greater sin than that. Now, there's a lot more that can be said about this. I don't need to tell it to you because somebody else already has. Elizabeth Shown Mills, in her quick lesson 15, Plagiarism, 5 Copy Wrongs of Historical Writing. It's a free read on her website, Evidence Explained, and it walks us through the ways we get ourselves in trouble as researchers by not properly crediting the work of others. And of course, it reminds us that the genealogical proof standard requires us to cite our sources. And by itself, that's going to go a long way towards keeping us from falling into the plagiarism trap. But, even giving credit isn't going to get us out of trouble if what we're borrowing is covered by copyright. That set of legal protections given to writers and photographers and artists, anybody who creates original content. And this is true around the world. There are some stiff penalties if we infringe somebody else's copyright. Here in the United States, even if the copyright owner doesn't lose any money, they can sue us for up to $150,000 in statutory damages. So it's our job as researchers not to infringe on other people's rights. And this is emphasized in the terms of service of websites like MyHeritage. This is our contract with the website. And MyHeritage couldn't be clearer on this. We are not supposed to upload any content that doesn't belong to us or if we don't have permission to use it. And when it comes to copyright, we can't upload any content that violates intellectual property rights of others. And that section goes on to say, we, MyHeritage, are extremely sensitive to the copyright and intellectual property rights of others. Be aware that content, including photographs, even if submitted to a site of which you are a member, belongs to its creator or submitter, and you shouldn't reproduce it without the permission of the owner. So scrupulously adhering to the best practices of genealogy, giving credit through citing all our sources, through not plagiarizing, through respecting the copyrights of others. That's how we play nice with others in that family history sandbox. And then comes the hard rule, the one that says, don't tell tales out of school. And I think this is the hardest of all of them because there's an inherent tension between privacy on one hand and sharing on the other. And we, as the genealogist, as the family historian, are often caught in the middle. On one hand, we know something that's true. We can prove it. So we have a duty to tell the truth, don't we? Rule number one. Except on the other hand, there are living, breathing human beings whose personal privacy can be invaded, because sometimes that true story isn't our true story. And I don't think there's any area where this tension is more apparent than when it comes to the secrets that are hidden deep in our genetic code. The issue here, of course, is that our test results can disclose information about people who haven't tested, who haven't even been asked to test. So our consent to any DNA test is limited. What it doesn't give us is the right to disclose the secrets of somebody else. That what somebody believes to be a family that looks like the typical ordinary dad, mom, brother, sister, nuclear family doesn't look at all like that when we look at the DNA. Maybe it looks a little different than what we expected, and maybe it looks a whole lot different from what we expected. There's not a genealogist around who's been working with DNA for more than a nanosecond who hasn't encountered something like this, either in our own families or in somebody else's family that we've been researching. And the reality is, in the vast majority of cases, these are not our stories to tell. And it isn't just in DNA. We can find this in a paper trail record. I found a record in my own family that makes it clear that a couple of cousins were, let's just say, not exactly born inside the bounds of wedlock. But that's not my story to tell. These are living people. That doesn't mean we don't note the information, but it means we don't share it and pass it on to others. We don't put it on our websites in ways that other people can see. And every one of these systems has, that's worth its salt, has protections in place to choose what we share and what we don't. If we're on MyHeritage, for example, we can drop down the menu next to our names with the arrow and choose My Privacy. And there we can find options that let us select our member preferences, whether others get to see our public profile or not. There are preferences for our DNA results, including whether or not to allow matching, to allow ethnicity estimates and genetic groups to be shared. There are options for our family trees, our websites, including who's allowed to access them and what content other people can see. And one feature I really like about MyHeritage is that all of the sharing is reciprocal. If you share, others can share with you. If you don't share, you're not going to be able to get what other people have contributed. And MyHeritage really is, I think, one of the leaders in privacy and the commitment to customer privacy, including the privacy of our DNA data. And that was underscored. It was one of the things that was highlighted when Francisco Partners recently acquired MyHeritage, that commitment to not only continuing but expanding personal privacy. But with all of these companies, MyHeritage included, it's our own choices that are critical. There's an excellent resource that will help with making good ethical choices in using any of these websites. So you want to go to the website of the United States National Genealogical Society. You want to use its search box and type in the word guidelines. And that'll return a results page where you can find the link to all of its guidelines. These are all free, downloadable PDFs, and you do not need to be a member of NGS to get to them. And one of them is something I think every responsible researcher needs to have. It's the guidelines for sharing information with others. It was most recently updated in 2016. And these guidelines remind us that genealogists and family historians consistently respect the restrictions on sharing information that arise from the rights of another person as a living private person. They go on to remind us that we observe meticulously the legal rights of copyright owners, and we only copy or repeat their work with their permission or under the law's exceptions, in the United States called fair use, in other places called fair dealing. We inform people, we tell them if they're going to give us information, what we're going to do with it. And if they put any limits on it, we follow those limits. We only share personal information about living people, and that's age, home address, genetic information, occupation, anything, in ways that they've expressly agreed to. And we understand that even if we got the information in a perfectly legal way, that doesn't mean it's our story to tell. There may still be privacy interests that need to be protected. And we do all of this because we are sensitive to the hurt that information we find and share can cause to other people. And we always think about that when we're making decisions on what we share. And we make those decisions carefully and cautiously because we, of all people, should understand that every single element of that genealogical code of ethics is aimed at protecting the rights of a living, breathing human being whose story isn't finished yet, but whose life and well-being could be affected by decisions we make. So we ought to understand that there are lines in the sand, a boundary we shouldn't ethically cross. And when we're looking at that line in any given case, we need to stop. Stop and think before we share anything. Before we write that blog post, before we get onto Facebook or Instagram, before we go into our email, before we put pen to paper, stop. Stop and think and remember that the instant it's out of our hands, the second we push send or hit that post button or old-fashioned drop an envelope into the mail, the second we let it out of our control, if there's hurt to be caused, it's caused in that moment. And there's no way we're going to be able to get it back. So the ethics of being a family historian, 3 rules. Tell the truth. Play nice with others. Don't tell tales out of school. Esther, I hope we've reserved a little bit of time for some questions. I know I may have run a little late.
No, that was perfect. And so those rules are just so true, and just so many issues that I see have come up here in the questions. So I think there's a lot of questions that we have for you now. Just before I get to them, I'll just read out a couple nice comments that we received throughout, if that's okay. Let's see. There was Kathy who said, any day is a good day for some Judy. Hello from rainy Mississippi. So welcome, Kathy. We also had another comment here from let's see if I could find from Lori. And she said, I hope that the Facebook Live sessions will continue after our world is open again and after this pandemic. And Lori, we do hope so, because we see the value that all these sessions are bringing to our viewers, and we love hosting them. So definitely that is the plan. Terry wrote here, really enjoyable and amazing topic. Thank you. So I think it was just so interesting, and really something that most of us don't really take the time to stop and think about as we're researching.
And we certainly, it's not something that's emphasized when we're baby genealogists, when we're just getting started. And that's when we tend to make our worst mistakes. And I made them all, every last one of them, including putting very private information about one of my relatives on my website. I didn't mean to. It was an accident, but it got out there anyway. So we need to be really careful about this.
Definitely. So let's take a few questions from the audience. Let's see. Kim asks, if a person is deceased, isn't it true that their information is no longer data protected? GDPR UK and Europe, and does this also apply to other countries as well?
In general, yes, you're right, that a person's individual right to privacy dies with them. That's certainly the rule in the United States, and it appears to be the developing rule under the GDPR in Europe. But I want to sound a caution on this. Remember that, if you're going to tell a story about your mom, and it has to do with your conception, it's not just about the mom, it's about the child as well. So many of these stories have intergenerational impact, and we need to be careful about that. I think by the time we're talking about great-grandparents, it's a pull up our big girl panties and move on. But anything more recent than that, I want to make a mistake, if I'm going to make a mistake, on the side of being careful.
Definitely wise to err on the side of caution, and to consider all the parties involved, as you said, not just the one person who we think is the main player in the story. And that's kind of similar to Stephen's comment. And Stephen wrote to us and said, I've heard some family stories. I asked them if it was a fact, and it sounds like they assumed some things. So I assumed there were no good facts and noted the story, but I keep looking for facts that may back it up.
Yeah, there's a great article written by my friend Tom Jones, and he wrote it for the BCG newsletter called On Board, and it's on the BCG website for free. It's called The Perils of Source Snobbery. It's when we either, assume that anything that's like in a birth record has got to be true. We all know that's not the case. And it's also things like, well, I'm never going to look at that family tree because nothing in family trees is true. That's not true either. In both situations, we really need to broaden our views and not be snobs when it comes to sources. We don't share them until we've documented them. But boy, do we note them.
We have a question here from Shelley, and she asks, what is Judy's opinion on the Maryland bill to limit genetic genealogy for criminal cases? I personally am livid. It is already so difficult to solve these cases.
Understand, first of all, that the Maryland statute, and there's one in Montana, and there are also Department of Justice guidelines. These do not stop law enforcement from using DNA to solve crimes. What they do is they protect the privacy of people who tested without any knowledge or consent that their data could be used in that way. So it's not a stop. It's not a you can't do it. And by the way, most police officials in Maryland think it's a pretty good bill. They had a lot of input into the way it was constructed. And it also has nothing whatsoever to do with things like trying to find an adoptive parent or any of that sort of thing. It's exclusively the law enforcement situation. And all it basically says is, in this situation, like in any criminal investigation, If you want access to something that isn't the ordinary, go to a judge, get a warrant. That's the way we handle most of this stuff around the world, not just in the United States. So I don't think that there's a problem with it. And remember that you can always consent to have your DNA used for these purposes. You can upload your data to GEDmatch. You can put it into a database where that's the purpose of it. So it's your choice. And that's what Maryland is protecting. Your choice.
Okay, we have a question here from, let's see. I saw a question here from Sherry. She asks, as the VP of our local genealogy society, are we required to get signed permission from donors of family history research?
It's a safer thing to do. I wouldn't say that you're required to, no, because there is a library society type exception to the copyright law here in the United States. It's a particular section of Title 17 of the United States Code, and it gives you some protection. But if you're going to want to be able someday to perhaps digitize those family histories and put them online, the person who put that together, if it's not just a database, but has like real words, they've got a copyright interest. And you want to not have to worry about that in 20 years when you can't find that person or that person's heirs. So getting a signed release up front is the way to make sure that that's never going to come back and bite you.
Mali asks, how do you handle material which you possess, such as original documents, which are also found as data legally sourced on websites?
I wouldn't handle it any other. It's a matter of source citation at that point. We cite what we use. So if I have my original birth certificate from Colorado, and no, I'm not going to tell you when it was, a long time ago, I'm going to cite that original birth certificate. I'm not going to cite what somebody puts online. If it impacts a living person, then I don't care if it's on that pay website or not. I'm not going to share it, not without that living person's consent. That's an ethical obligation, not a legal obligation. And I can't emphasize enough, just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right. And that's something we have to think about.
Right. I think it's a paradigm shift for a lot of us.
It certainly is.
Joanne asks, when you find an obituary, is making sure that you name the newspaper or funeral home enough?
Nope. I understand that this is a hard one. Everybody wants to be able to, copy and paste that obituary everywhere. But the reality is somebody wrote that. And that person, whoever it is, and it's usually a family member, owns the copyright on that. Now, the facts in the obituary are fair game. You cannot copyright a fact. So the fact that my mother died in April of 1999 in Fluvanna County, Virginia, those are facts, and anybody can extract those from the obituary, citing the source, and use them. But the exact words that were used by the family in writing that obit, you're going to need permission if it's within the copyright time period, which is a very long time.
Okay, we'll just take one last question from the audience. We have a question here from Steve, and I think this kind of sums it all up. He asks, what constitutes permission from another person? Is it just a letter? Can it be in a different form?
We're living in a technological age. If I get on Zoom with a grandparent and say, Grandpa, I want to use all of your photos. Is that okay? And on camera, and I now have this recorded, he says, sure, honey, you do whatever you want. That's permission. If it's, a repository, I'm going to get it in writing. If it's the author of an article, an email. We have technological options. I don't think it's essential that we get a written signature. But we need to be able to prove it in something other than a he said, she said situation. Whatever that is, an audio file, a video file, an email, a letter, just make sure you can prove it.
Okay, fantastic. And I saw a lot of questions here, a few questions in the audience, asking if this session is being recorded. So definitely all of our Facebook Live sessions, this one included, are all recorded. Judy, do we have your permission to leave it up on our Facebook page?
You absolutely have my permission to leave it up on your Facebook page. And for anybody whose question didn't get answered, feel free to pop over to my blog, and there's an Ask the Legal Genealogist, Ask TLG button on every page. Pop me the question, and if I can answer it on the blog, I'm happy to do it.
Fantastic. That is so generous of you. Thank you so much. And what an informative and interesting session. It's a topic that we haven't really discussed in the past on our Facebook Lives, and I think it was just so interesting for all of us. So thank you so much for joining us today. And
thank you for having me.
If you'll hang with me for a second, we'll just give away the MyHeritage Complete Plan to one lucky winner in our audience. So a lot of fantastic questions and comments from all of our viewers here today in the comments section. So thank you to everyone who left a question for Judy and a comment about MyHeritage photo tools, or just in general about privacy or ethical genealogy questions. And we have a winner. The winner of today's complete plan is Wendy Lofel Wallace. And Wendy wrote to us and she said, I used the animation tool for my late father's photo to show my mother, and it brought tears to her eyes. It is also amazing to see what my second and third great grandparents may have looked like in motion. So cool. Well, Wendy, congratulations. We're so glad to be able to help bring that emotion to you and your family. And we'll be in touch with you through private message to claim your prize. Just one last comment here I see from Victoria. She said, thank you so much. So great to learn from an expert in their field. And I couldn't agree more. Judy, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and knowledge about this topic with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, have a great day, everybody. Thank you for joining us.